Marty Fiorentino is with us, founder of the Fiorentino Group. And Marty, let's start with you, because as we sit around the table, you may have had more personal interaction with Bush 41 than the rest of us.
Well, I was lucky. I was late 20s, and Tilly Fowler, who you remember was a city councilwoman, she chaired the Bob Dole campaign. And she had a relationship with the Doles, a roommate of Elizabeth Dole's. Her daughter is a goddaughter to Elizabeth Dole, so there was nobody to chair the Bush campaign for president. And there had been that Newsweek article in the front of Newsweek with a yellow slicker, the wimp factor, and so I became, by default, the chairman of the George Herbert Walker Bush campaign for president in Duval County.
No kidding.
And I was in my late 20s, and the next thing you know, he's president. And then I became, it's kind of like you hear this week, the points of light, and he was that point of light that there were so many that came after him, and as a part of that, and I felt like I was one of those. There are thousands, probably tens of thousands of people just like me who had interaction with President Bush and felt a part of the Bush family. And so I went to Washington with a political appointment in his administration and had the honor to serve. And since that time have followed him and just felt a part of this immense family that he created beyond his own great family. And that's why I'm here with this 1989 sweater from the inauguration, which I've had 30 years for that very reason.
That's that logo. Point it out again, Marty, because we can see
right
it.
Here.
Yeah, there's the logo there from the inauguration in 1989.
So why did I keep this 30 years? Because you just had that feeling that you were a part of history.
Yeah, well, and we were showing some of the photos that you shared with us of your time when you'd been with President Bush, the First Lady, as well. What's the feeling that you were left with as that young man getting involved and suddenly being connected to a person who'd been elected president?
Well, again, you felt like part of this larger Bush family, larger than yourself. You learned what public service was about because George W. Bush lived that. You felt like you were following a hero. He was shot down. And you knew that you were involved with someone with great integrity. So there was a lot of moments there where you felt like this was a man that you could follow. This was what politics was all about. This is what you got involved. Well, a young person got involved with politics for because someone you could believe in. And so for all these years, the respect that I felt for him and his family has been immense. And so it was a sad week, but it was also a celebratory week and a week where we can all look at what it really means, public service, patriotism, service to country and family. And he just exhibited, you check every box in what you would want a great individual to be, and he checked all those boxes. So it was very touching.
Yeah, was there, while you're serving in the administration there, Marty, was there talk of, boy, this is really big stuff, all those items that were just mentioned in 89 and 90 and 91?
Well, keep in mind when that was, when there was added security at your building, as we were bombing, that you thought, wow, this is serious stuff. These are big things. As the Soviet Union, as the wall came down and people brought back pieces of the wall, and I've got one of those, a very small piece, you thought, this is heady stuff. And as you look back, it's, as Rick eloquently just pointed out, it's so much bigger now. As we look back, we recognize just how incredible it was globally, what was going on during those years. And as Ray pointed out, he had all the experience necessary to address those issues.
What does seeing that image mean to you? Marty, why don't you start?
Well, it's powerful if you're an American to see all those commanders and chiefs and first ladies in the first row. It also shows how the transition of power occurs in this country peacefully, and the fact that they would all be there for this funeral. So that's what it meant to me. I mean, it's historic to see just that picture and all those presidents in line.
And kind of builds on the patriotism that I think we would all feel.
It wasn't a week for Democrats or Republicans, it was a week for Americans. And I think that was, I think it was sorely needed right now. We all knew this day would come, but now that it's here this week, I hope it sinks into this country as just what service and patriotism, civility means. For me, this is, when the family priest talked about seeing, James Baker, I mean, he's a tough guy. I mean, he's the guy that came down on the recount, and everybody, when he hit Tallahassee, things were gonna, but massaging the president's feet, and you had the world leader he said massaging who had made the world leader, the world leader's feet. It just, and the symbolism there can't.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Can't be ignored of Jesus and the disciples. But the fact that he would, in 30 minutes, that was powerful to me and touching. That was really strong.
As the Navy veteran is laid to rest today in Annapolis, Maryland at the Naval Academy. And Senator McCain's funeral took place over the weekend, and this is video from Arizona, his casket in the center of the Capitol Rotunda on what would have been his 82nd birthday. He's been remembered by political allies and enemies alike and nearly always mentioned with respect. So joining us now, Marty Fiorentino served in President George H.W. Bush's administration starting in 1989. And of course, when we think about Senator McCain, his service in the U.S. Senate goes back to the 80s as well. Tell me maybe what you remember, first time you met him or were introduced.
Well, the first time I was introduced, it was in awe. I mean,
Yeah.
he was already an American hero by that time. He was in the U.S. Senate, and I was in Washington, and I was just a staff person then. And so to be introduced to John McCain was a real treat. And he was 10 feet tall to me back then.
Yeah, how did he treat you though? You said you were just a staff person. My interaction with him is he never treated people like they were just somebody on the low end of the totem pole there.
You know, he had a touch about him that he was never serious about himself. And he had a self-deprecating humor, and he always wanted people to feel like they were important. And I think that was one of the lasting tributes, is that he could talk to people of any ilk and make them feel important because he didn't feel important.
Marty, what was the impact? Obviously 30-some years serving in the U.S. Senate, but before that the House, and he always came with, you knew some of the backstory. This guy was a prisoner of war, served his country, and now he's continuing to serve. He's a patriot, right?
A true patriot, and and a statesman. And you kind of wonder now, where do we go from here, and who is going to pick up that mantle? But I hope that the memory that he leaves and what we can celebrate in his life is his ability to reach across the aisle. He was able to take the big issues and work with Democrats, other Republicans. Sometimes he was called a maverick, sometimes he was called a liberal, sometimes he was called a conservative. And you didn't know exactly what he would be called on any given issue, because I think he was the conscience of the Senate. And he wanted to vote his conscience. And he wanted to debate ideas and ideals, but didn't debate the motives people had behind those ideals. He wanted to get to the big issues, and he reached across the aisle, whether it was with Vice President Biden when he was in the U.S. Senate, or Ted Kennedy, and then also in his own party sometimes he had to reach out. But people liked him and knew that when he spoke that he cast a long shadow, and so people listened to him, and he tried to create a bipartisanship that we really don't have today.
Well, I met him when he came to Jacksonville for an event. He was campaigning for Mitt Romney at the time. This is 6 years ago. You know him from some Jacksonville connections as well, right?
Well, I can tell you there are a lot of people in Jacksonville that probably know him better than I do, because they were here when he came back from being a prisoner of war. I don't know how many people remember that he came back to Orange Park. He was treated at the Naval Hospital here. He was at NAS Jack, so he spent a number of years here in Jacksonville. His children graduated from high school. 2 of his sons graduated from high school here. And so Jacksonville meant a lot to him. Orange Park meant a lot to him. And I can give you one anecdote, and that was he was campaigning for president in 2008. Plane lands out at Jacksonville International Airport, and former Mayor Hans Tanzler was in a wheelchair. His son was there pushing him, pushed him up, and John McCain looked around and saw him and came over and knelt by him and talked to him and told him how much he remembered the key to the city that he had given him while he was mayor. And it was a very touching moment, and that's the kind of John McCain you were talking about, being able to communicate, talk, identify with people across the aisle, whether they were Democrat, Republican, rich or poor.
What's your last conversation, I guess, you had with Senator McCain?
Well, a couple I want to mention to you. The last conversation, I was at an event with him, and there happened to be an event where he was speaking. And I was really touched that during the event, he stopped and looked over and saw me. He said, "Marty, you were there in my darkest hours." And I'm thinking, I was not at the Hanoi Hilton. And he said, in the 2008 campaign, the summer when our campaign was in the dumper, you were there for me and didn't waver, and he valued loyalty greatly, and he was very loyal. I remember going with my son to Target at Jack's Beach, and my phone rang, this on a Saturday morning, and it was Senator McCain. I thought, what in the world would Senator McCain be calling me for? And he talked through my shopping trip with my son, through Target, till we got back in the car, about the campaign and wanted to know how things were going in Florida, what he thought was going on, what I thought was going on. And as I look back on it, it was a special moment. This outpouring of support we're feeling across the country is, I think, good for the country. I hope it's a healing moment. I think that's the way he would have it. For someone to have been beat by President Obama, President Bush in campaigns, and then ask them to speak at his funeral, that speaks volumes.
It really does. Marty, a lot of us have great memories of him, and we'll see his legacy play out. I appreciate the time.